Hi, everyone. Yeah. Welcome to the final spring event here for Gaelic Roots. My name is Sheila Falls Cohane, and I direct the Gaelic Roots series at Boston College. I want to just say a couple of thank yous because it is the final event. Thanks to Jack Kearney here, who records on the camera, who records all the events for the Burns Library, and Beth Sweeney, who's at the back of the room, who archives all of these events so that you can watch them. And there's quite a few people in Cork that asked me to please make sure that this is recorded. So as soon as you can get this edited, let me know. So it's very exciting to me. I married into this Cohane-O'Brien clan, and we all know Joe Durain very well, right? One of the greatest accordion players. But he was taught and inspired by Jerry O'Brien, and I don't think, there's been much done about Jerry O'Brien, or people don't know about Jerry O'Brien. So I had this opportunity to bring some attention and recognition to Jerry O'Brien. So I put a wonderful ethnomusicologist on the job to do the digging, and he is here and going to give a presentation. Dan Neely is here from New York, and he's going to give a presentation about Jerry O'Brien. I'm sure the family actually will learn a lot. Already I've learned a lot. And then after that, there'll be a quick Q&A, and maybe a quick changeover to bring in Diarmid O'Maher from Cork, wonderful accordion player who plays with Dedanand and solos all around the world. He's here and he teaches at Holy Cross now, and he's going to play the second half. So we'll just take a minute to reset, but we're just gonna keep going just to get all of this in. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce ethnomusicologist Dan Neely.
Hello, all right. Well, first off, I want to thank everybody for coming. And I want to thank Sheila and Beth and everybody who does all the Irish music stuff here. It's fantastic. It's great to be here today to talk about Jerry O'Brien. He's a musician that doesn't get talked about enough, and I'm delighted to be here to talk about him. So let's jump right in. All right, there's our man right there, Jerry. Jeremiah Patrick O'Brien was born on March 16th, 1899 in Kinsale County, Cork. His home for the first 22 years of his life. Now, unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about his life there. Certainly not enough to impress most of the folks in this room. I do know that he was a dancer, and I imagine it was in Cork where he developed his champion level terpsichorean skill. I don't know if it was where he learned to play the accordion, because sources seem to disagree on that point. But details such as these are incidental, as you might argue. They're not the most significant nor formative events of O'Brien's early life. I think for that we should think more about what Susan Goduda said about O'Brien in her seminal book, See You at the Hall. There she wrote that O'Brien, quote, witnessed the days of the 1916 Easter Rising and the War for Independence. Living in West Cork, the immediacy and volatility of those conflicts were things that surely affected O'Brien and gave him strong feelings, not only about Ireland as a nation, but also about his role in it. Indeed, it was this experience that directly linked to why he left Ireland. In preparation for this talk, I was able to speak with Joe O'Brien, Jerry's youngest son, and Fred McCormick, O'Brien's son-in-law. Both of them communicated a bit of family lore. That O'Brien was a hedgerow teacher of the Irish language, and for this perceived act of insurrection, he was wanted by the Black and Tans. They intended to hang him. Now, that's a dramatic story. Jerry had to be rushed out of Cork and was snuck onto a ship, penniless, with only a suitcase and the clothes on his back to his name. Now, how do you even verify a story like this? I mean, I had a devil of a time even finding the record of his journey, but I persevered and eventually found confirmation of his trip over. Now, I think a few things emerge in the immigration manifest that speak very strongly to this story. First, the ship's immigration officer made a bit of a mess typing out his name, which makes it O'Brien even harder which makes him harder to discover on the page. If you're just glancing down at the page. The jumble kind of looks like it reads Gerenial O'Brien. Now, mind you, all the other information there is correct. The age is right. His mother was indeed Mary from the Dundero Kinsale, and the destination city, Boston, was where his brother Timothy lived. But besides the hard-to-make-out name, there was one other intriguing detail that maybe suggests the aid of an immigration official sympathetic to the need for administrative concealment. His indicated sex was female. Anyway, the manifest shows that Jeremiah Gerenial O'Brien left Ireland on May 1st, 1921 on the Cedric and arrived in New York's Ellis Island on May 10th. Then, as the story goes, he headed northwards towards Boston. Early on, he worked as a butler near Gloucester, and that was just over 10 years before meeting his future wife, Mary Egan, at a kitchen racket. And in between, he led an adventuresome life as a musician in Boston. Now, I'd like to stick a pin here for a moment and briefly talk about how I got in front of you all here today. When I was a graduate student at NYU, I was in a band that Mick Maloney started called the Washington Square Harp and Shamrock Orchestra. It was based on the Irish dance bands in America in the 1920s, including the Four Provinces Orchestra in Philadelphia, Pat Roach's Harp and Shamrock Band from Chicago, and the Dan Sullivan Shamrock Band and O'Leary's Irish Minstrels, both from Boston. And for several years, the WSHSO played around the city frequently, and in 2011, we recorded an album called Since Maggie Dooley Learned the Hooly Hooly. Now, in time, I became the group's leader, and because I grew up here in Newton, just down Beacon Street in Waban, I took an interest, and my wife might say an unhealthy obsession, in Boston's bands of the 20s and 30s, particularly Dan Sullivan, who was buried just down the street from here. That interest led me to people like Michael Hanifin, Joseph O'Leary, and many others. Now, as I dug into traditional music making here in Boston in the late 19th and 20th centuries, I came across Jerry O'Brien's name a good fair bit, but only starting in 1926, and then entirely in connection to Joseph O'Leary. I could never figure out how so gifted and fully defined an accordionist could have seemingly come out of nowhere without some kind of lore behind his name. I kind of gave up looking for a brief time until I realized that maybe I was going about it all wrong. A name that I had noticed in my perusings but had never really thought much of was Jerome O'Brien. Could he have been the same person? As I began to connect the dots, I realized that Jerry had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. At first in an outfit called the Irish Pipers Band of Boston, and I just didn't realize it. Oh, this is where it says he's a female right there. The Irish Pipers Band of Boston, not to be confused with the Irish Pipers Club, an unrelated organization composed largely of inland pipers that had been formed 15 or so years earlier by the brothers Hanifin, William, and Michael, were a group that embraced and promoted Irish national culture and used music and dance to spread the good news. As you can see here, they donned a national costume and performance that newspaper coverage at the time indicated was the product of the Gaelic revival that, according to the band's own accounting, was related to a particular moment in Ireland in 1920. Band members played the Piedmore and gave exhibitions of military-style drilling at outdoor events and were well known at GAA field days in particular. They also appeared at and in fact sponsored a variety of indoor events, including grand balls, dinner dances, and socials. Some of these events were fundraisers with monies raised used to purchase sets of war pipes and uniforms from abroad. In everything they did, it seems, the IPBB worked to inspire and foster a sense of political nationalism amongst Boston's Irish. To this end, their cultural activities included things like promoting Gaelic cultural events. For example, they made a push to revive the old Wren Bush Festival at Christmas in 1924, and the year before that, they sponsored their first fesh for singing and dancing. It took place on October 16th, 1923, and our man Jerome was on the fesh committee. These were a few of the winners that year. So we have Christina Buckley. She won professional women in the under 20 class. Nora Toomey, whose father, Michael J. Toomey, we're going to come to in a few minutes. She won the 10-14 class. Babe Walsh was the under 10 class, and then other prizes were given out for things like the four-hand reel and amateurs under 20, etc. And doing exhibition dances at this event were Neely O'Gorman Hayes, professional champion, and Professor Michael Kelleher, national champion. They both danced at the event, gave demonstrations. These two folks were important dancers whose names show up often in early 20th century articles about Irish music and dance in Boston. So I don't know if anybody ever talks about these people at all. If you are related to these people or have any relation to these people, please speak up, because these are people who are very, very important in the world of Irish dance in Boston, the early 20th century, and nope, they seem to have fallen off the face of the research planet. But anyway, the Pipers Band was popularly supported around the state, not only because people liked what they stood for, but maybe also because they had a measure of clout that blended Irish culture and Republican politics. They had the endorsement of the widows of Thomas McCurtain, the Sinn Féin politician who served as the Lord Mayor of Cork, who was assassinated by the Royal Irish Constabulary in 1920, and that of Terence McSweeney, the Sinn Féin politician who succeeded him as Lord Mayor of Cork and died while on hunger strike in Brixton Prison later on in 1920. Jerry and his brother became Irish Piper Band officials in 1923. These photos were published on their re-election in 1924. They were both very active in organizing and participating in their events until very early in 1925, and it could be the end of 1924, I'm not exactly sure. They were very, regardless of this particular moment in time, they both moved on. I don't know the reason for this, because the politics of the organization don't seem to have changed, and I wonder if there was some sort of falling out amongst leadership. Regardless, Michael J. Toomey, who I mentioned a second ago, a Corkonian, 20 years O'Brien Sr., kept the Irish Pipers Band of Boston going for at least the next couple decades. These are Toomey's bagpipes. By the way, a quick list. I mean, it's nice to see to get a sense of what this might have looked like. It's a Henderson set made in Glasgow, and it belonged to Toomey when he was with the Irish Pipers Band of Boston, and it sold at auction just before the pandemic. But note the pamphlets. Very early on, Toomey worked as a travel agent, and these are two brochures advertising cruises to Ireland. Grand excursions, they were called. And he led them, and on these cruises, the Irish Pipers Band played. Jarman was earlier, he joked, and I've often joked that Joni wasn't the first. Not by a long shot, but one of these pamphlets dates to 1928, and on it indicates that it was the 5th such excursion. So it seems to start in 1923. And I do think that Michael J. Toomey was the first one to lead these kinds of cruises. This is on the inside of the case, and this is the band's logo. Just stuck there, and note the legend at the bottom. Organized, August 21, 1922. Now here's another picture of the band from 1924. O'Brien's there in the front row, second from far right. The line, organized August 21st, 1922, is again on conspicuous display at the bottom of the bass drum. The way it's highlighted here and on the decal makes me sort of wonder whether it's the actual date of the group's formation or a symbolic date of some sort, one that all the group's members voted to agree upon that speaks to the group's political stance. Now, I want to take a moment here to kind of lean on that idea. Symbolic gestures were common with Irish music organizations of the era. They can be found all over the place if you look for them. The reason for this are clearly explained in a 1927 pamphlet the Philadelphia-based Four Provinces Orchestra had printed to celebrate its 10th anniversary. In it, the band's leader and pianist, Edward Lee, framed the group's formation in explicitly political terms, a product of what he called the, quote, Sinn Féin idea. Lee explained the notion, writing that although the concept of cultural nationalism had grown for a generation, the problem of Ireland was, quote, much more than that of a form of government or reformed land laws, and considerably more than putting the blame on the English for every evil in Ireland. More crucial was the belief that, quote, modern Ireland had become almost entirely divorced from its own peculiar cultural and civilization, and that the Irishman of today's responsibility was to recover that which had been lost, to, quote, bring each Irishman back to the full realization of the value of his own personal heritage, he argued, would require such an intellectual investment in the study of Irish language, drama, art, music, and dance. Such, in brief, he concluded, was the gospel of Sinn Féin. Lee lamented that Sinn Féin ideals had been virtually absent in America until the Easter Rising of 1916 when, quote, the Irish American was suddenly confronted with something new to understand which necessitated thought. Irish America responded to Ireland's new state of affairs quickly, and by 1917, the Sinn Féin idea was beginning to bear real fruit in music. I will talk about this more fully in a moment, but you can find this Sinn Féin ideal begin to manifest itself in New York, for example, where Ellen O'Byrne DeWitt began producing records for the Irish community. Among them were important recordings of traditional dance music, but also the first recordings, first commercial recordings in the Irish language, songs in the Irish language, and the first recording of the Irish national anthem. At the very same time in Boston, Dan J. Sullivan made a series of piano roll transcriptions of Irish dance music that were expressions of this idea as well. But in Philadelphia, this patriotic fervor was what Lee said led to the establishment of the four provinces. Interestingly, the abbreviated name of the group used to refer to itself was FPO, the FPO. Mick Maloney used to call them the 4 Ps, but they called themselves the FPO. And according to an interview with Lee held at the British Library, the acronym FPO's similarity to GPO for the General Post Office in Dublin that served as headquarters of the leaders of the Easter Rising was intentional. And I think it's the sort of clear symbolic gesture that I'm suggesting here. Now, the patriotic fervor felt in Philadelphia was surely matched in Boston. So I wonder whether the display of August 21st, 1922, in a group that marched around in military formation, performed on war pipes, was an embrace of Sinn Féin ideals, was the kind of embrace of Sinn Féin ideals that Lee was talking about. Why? Because August 21st, 1982 was the day before Michael Collins was assassinated. And where he was assassinated was just 20 miles from O'Brien's hometown of Kinsale and perhaps close to the home spot of other Corkonians in the band. Now, just to backtrack a bit, I stopped seeing O'Brien's name in articles concerning the Irish Pipers Band in early 1925. At that point, he seems to have jumped ship, falling in instead with an apparently parallel group called the All-Ireland Pipers Band of Massachusetts, under the direction of this fellow named Joseph O'Leary. Then, a matter of weeks later, O'Brien and his brother started appearing in the context of another O'Leary-led and probably founded organization called the Celtic Harmony Club. The CHC seems to have been formed circa 1923, but was probably associated with the All-Ireland Pipers. It appears to have only lasted until early 1926, but it seems to have been quite influential in traditional Irish music circles around Boston. Now, O'Leary was a Mainer, and he was a fiddle player. His family moved to South Boston in the early teens, and in the 1920s, he took a special interest in the revival of traditional music. He was a musical entrepreneur and ambassador for traditional music of sorts, but he's best known for founding O'Leary's Irish Minstrels, to whom we will get in a minute. But back to the Celtic Harmony Club. The CHC appears to have been very popular with the Boston musicians in the mid-1920s. It was reported that in February 1925, their 400 large membership had been experiencing continued rapid growth, and I think it's really noteworthy that someone like Dan Sullivan of Shamrock Band fame could be counted among their ranks. But that year, it seems its membership surge reflected an intensification of local interest in traditional music. As of March that year, it started holding weekly dances in O'Connell Hall in Roxbury's Hibernian building that featured programs of traditional music and dance. Later on in the year, they added a Saturday dance. The CHC also held an annual gala ball and concert with Jerome, a featured performer at the 1926 event. By September of that year, O'Leary had finagled his way into a regular and nationally syndicated radio spot on WEEI, which at that point had not yet become the Red Sox radio network. O'Leary's performances in this period consistently included O'Brien, who, true to form, was singled out in the newspaper coverage as a featured performer. The advertising for his September 1926 radio spot included a note about Jerome, the champion Irish accordionist of New England and radio broadcasting star. But what's special about late 1926 is this. It's the very moment in which O'Leary's Irish Minstrels happened, the band an apparent outgrowth of the Celtic Harmony Club, and its profile elevated by their radio prominence. In November of that year, O'Leary, Jerry O'Brien, and the rest of the gang would find themselves in Columbia Records' New York studios making their first tranche of O'Leary's Irish Minstrels recordings. In all, O'Leary, Jerry O'Brien, and company made 45 sides, a pair of O'Brien solo sides inclusive, over 2 sessions in 1926 and 1928, all for Columbia. Now here we have the O'Leary's Irish Minstrels. Oh, shh. Calm down. This is a group, this is what they look like, horns, drums and all. The audio I'm going to play here is an excerpt of of a side featuring a pair of polkas. I got a bonnet trimmed with blue, and come upstairs and we'll have a night of it. Rather provocative title. This comes from the 1926 session. Now, what's interesting is that Jerry doesn't play on all the O'Leary sides. And it's hard to find full band recordings that he's on, but he's on this one, and you'll be able to hear him if you listen closely. So here. Jerry's just blazing away in front of the band there. It's just brilliant propulsion. Now, got another one. This one comes from is a clip from the 1928 session. You can hear the difference in instrumentation. O'Brien's playing here with O'Leary and banjoist Johnny Maloney, who is one of the instrument's unsung heroes. But this is them playing Pigeon of the Gate again from 1928. Now, like I was saying, Jerry doesn't appear on every O'Leary's track. Rather, he was very much a member whose extraordinary talent afforded him special privilege in the band. And this position is what led to the pair of solo recordings. The only one from O'Leary's band who made solo recordings, and both of these solo sides were made in 1928. They're a great testament to his talent. This is one of them, Little Judy. Wicked. And here's, this is the excerpt from the other one, the Kildare Fancy. Great playing here once again. Interestingly enough, this tune was also recorded by Connie Hannafin, who was the accordionist with the Dan Sullivan Shamrock Band, and he did it 1 month later for Victor Records. And it seems like a bit of gamemanship between Boston bands, honestly, but you know. Now we get to the action. This is just as Burn to Wit. Just as one of the sons of New York City entrepreneur Ellen O'Byrne DeWitt, who I mentioned earlier. Ellen was born in Leitrim in 1875. She moved to New York in 1890, and in 1900 opened up a shop with her husband, Justice DeWitt. She was a determined young businesswoman who stocked all kinds of things in her shop and that catered to the Irish community. Irish imports like linen, Balik china, pipes, or things like smoking pipes were among her specialties. But she also sold musical instruments, phonographs, and whatever recordings of Irish music were available. She pioneered shipping records to Ireland, which is an important reason why a lot of US pressed discs could be found over there for a while. Now, early on, the Irish music she carried was largely limited to things like recordings of the tenor John McCormick or recordings of the Irish-German accordionist John Kimmel. But when the Easter Rising happened, it motivated her to approach Columbia with the idea of making recordings of Irish music by Irish musicians for the Irish community. It was the kind of parallel expression of the Sinn Féin idea Lee described that I alluded to just moments ago. Now, the earliest sides she arranged with Columbia in 1916 included, well, I already told you this, the first commercially recorded songs in the Irish language and the national anthem, and then the dance music she recorded featured two musicians, Eddie Herborn, who was an accordionist, and banjoist John Wheeler. And then she sold them from her store, which was called the Irish Victrola Shop, which eventually became DeWitt's House of Music, which was later rebranded as the Sinn Féin Music House. The trail Ellen Byrne DeWitt blazed led in a very, and seriously, Ellen Byrne DeWitt really needs to be in somebody that everybody should be aware of, because she was an incredible person whose leadership really made Irish music, put it on the pedestal it is today. Nobody talks about her. She's super important. But the trail she blazed led in a very, very direct way to the entire Irish music recording industry. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that she was one of the most important figures in Irish history, and it's a shame that she's not more widely recognized. When she died on December 21st, 1926, she had been planning to open a branch of her shop in Boston, a fact that was announced in the New York City-based Irish World newspaper just a few days before her passing. Her son Justice had moved there some time before to prepare the location, and he settled in Roxbury, where he met Joe O'Leary, who not only assisted him in establishing his business, but helped him find his store space at 51 Warren Street, right at the corner of Dudley and Warren, on the first floor of the Hotel Dartmouth. It was a location that put them in walking distance of all the major dance halls that Susan Cadutas wrote about in Stephen the Hall. In anticipation of this expansion, the DeWitts had plans for a record label and put out feelers in the nationally sold Irish World newspaper, soliciting artists interested in releasing on their house label. DeWitt, who already had a relationship with O'Leary, appears to have facilitated the relationship with Columbia such that when O'Leary's records were ready to go, DeWitt was there with his shop to sell them to the public. Now note the phrase at the bottom there that echoed his mother's lead: "We send records to Ireland safely." Let's see. A year later, O'Brien was working in DeWitt's shop, and it could have been earlier than that. I just going with the evidence that I have. And he worked as an accordion demonstrator, as this February 1927 ad shows, but having a sense of DeWitt and O'Leary's close relationship, I suspect that O'Brien was really there right off the bat. Over the years, O'Brien fulfilled lots of roles at the shop, including instrument sales and demonstration, shipping clerk, instruction, and eventually talent scout and producer for the copy label. But in the early days, music was the name of the game for DeWitt, and that whole sending records to Ireland service he offered got him thinking. If he's selling records to be sent over to Ireland, why shouldn't he sell passage to Ireland and expand into the travel business? So in the spring of 1927, DeWitt approached Cunard Lines with the idea of becoming an agent. They flatly turned him down. They already had more agents than they needed for Ireland, but each year he returned. Same question, same answer. But in 1930, his old friend Joe O'Leary, of all people, said that he could get him an advertising spot in the middle of his show on EEI for $15. So DeWitt put together an announcement about the Irish records his shop sold, and at the end included a line about booking passage to Ireland through E. O'Byrne DeWitt and Sons, adding that he'd assist with passport, visa, and re-entry permit. While the response was overwhelming, the Cunard people weren't too happy because DeWitt had no relationship with them at all. They simply wouldn't budge, nor would they give him any kind of commission on sales, but he was determined and did this land office retail business for 3 years, knowing things would change, and eventually they did in 1933. But this side of the business, even though it wasn't profitable, was successful. And on those cruises, he arranged for musical entertainment. And can you guess his choice for a musical leader? That's right, Jerry O'Brien. This is the brochure from the 1933 cruise, the 1934 cruise. It wasn't the first time O'Brien had done the cruise, because he did it, as it says here, the year before. But it's noteworthy because he's featured so prominently as an attraction in the advertising. I don't know if you can read it in the back, but it says, Jerry O'Brien, the well-known accordion player of O'Leary's Irish Minstrels, has been a featured artist all over New England for the past 8 years. He's been heard from coast to coast over the National Broadcasting Company network with the Minstrels. Jerry O'Brien has been associated with E. O'Byrne DeWitt's Sons for the past 7 years. He is considered by many music lovers as one of the best accordion players in the country and has made several recordings of Irish selections for the Columbia Phonograph Company, which have been most popularly received. Jerry has made a number of trips to the old country and conducted our party to the Eucharistic Congress in 1932. He will be only too glad to help you with the details of your trip. Now, O'Brien and DeWitt had a long-standing association. DeWitt kept his business going into the 30s and through the war, and when things were particularly lean, he sponsored a twice-weekly Irish program on Boston's WMEX radio station in an effort to keep his audience engaged when there was no record manufacturing to be had. But as soon as Decca started making records again, DeWitt made a manufacturing deal with him and set up the Copley label. O'Brien was the first to record and came out with several solo sides, including this one, which I particularly like because it was first recorded in 1927 by Michael Hanifin and Dan Sullivan as Dan Sullivan's Favorite, a name surely in reference to Dan Sullivan's father, also named Dan, who had a huge and direct influence on the generation of musicians that immediately preceded O'Brien, but included Sullivan and Hanifin. And this is an excerpt from the Gypsy Horn Pipe. By the way, all these musical notations I've put up, these are all, when they're musical notations, they are included in one of the two books that DeWitt published of O'Brien. So one of them is the, there's a tune book, and then there's an instruction manual. And all these are hosted on the Irish Traditional Music Archives website, ITMA in Dublin. If you don't know it, it's itma.ie. It's an excellent place to go for Irish music if you like that kind of thing. Here. All right, now I'm going to draw to a close here, but I have one more little slide to go, and that's Joe Duran. Now, Joe is was one of the great recording artists and great accordion players of the 20th century. Joe O'Brien, as I think you all know, taught him the accordion. He'd take Joe along to parties, and Joe would spell Jerry when Jerry got tired. In an interview I listened to with Joe, he said he'd listen and play along. Then when he needed a break, he'd play the tunes, and Jerry would give him pointers. Duran was close to O'Brien and his family. O'Brien introduced him to Dudley Street and presumably the DeWitts, who made many recordings of them. Some of them feature both of them for the Copley label starting in 1948 when Joe was 18 years old. And that's where I want to draw this to a close. Because once we get past that, I think everybody is aware of the story. But once again, I think that Jerry O'Brien is really, a pivotal person in the history of Irish music, and not only in Boston but the United States, and particularly because he was so involved with music on the radio and organizations that promoted Irish music, and also the things he did for musicians around Boston. So I'm going to sign off for now. I want to thank everybody for being here, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to field them. Yes, sir.
Just wondering about the early 1920s recordings. The one you played really kind of sounded like an acoustic recording to me.
Well,
And the others, certainly the ones in the 40s were electronic.
yeah.
And I was just wondering if you had any notion of that. The other question I had was kind of, is totally different. You mentioned how they had problems with Cunard and getting license or whatever.
Yeah.
But I noticed the ship of the tour was not a Cunard.
That's a Hamburg American line.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah, so knowing that had, okay, well, I'll start with the second question first. Knowing I had a limited amount of time, I streamlined DeWitt's story. So Mick Maloney interviewed Justice Byrne DeWitt, and in that, what happened in 1933 was, if I'm remembering this correctly, somebody from Cunard approached DeWitt and said, hey, listen, ease up, and introduced him to somebody with the Hamburg American line, and then that's how he became an agent earning commissions on things. So there was a little bit of like a sidestep in that year to ensure that he was able to get on the thing. About your first question. Now, that was an electric recording. 1926, when I listen to 1926 recordings, and I'm thinking of O'Leary, but I'm also thinking of the Dan Sullivan Band. Their recordings of the time have that sort of very boxy kind of sound that I think can be easily mistaken for an acoustic recording. But if you A/B those recordings against like ones that are from like 1923 or 1924, the difference is clear. It's just that like they might have had one mic as opposed to like, you know, two mics, or an improved microphone in 1928. And I think that's what you're listening for there. Also, I think if you listen to the instrumentation from the 1926 recording, you know, I wonder if the way the recording sounds, the room sound, is directly related to the instruments that they use. Because like in the second recording, you know, you have piano, banjo, fiddle, and button accordion. And I think that's going to give you a cleaner sound than like if you have like piano, tuba, trombone, and then, you know.
I was wondering because, you know, when I saw the size of the band, and I've seen images of the size of the horn.
Yeah.
For an acoustic, the horn was as big as this room.
Yeah, they're pretty big. Yeah.
You know, wondering how it came up.
Yes, sir.
When did you start the research project for this?
Well, so I have taken an unhealthy interest in Dan Sullivan for like more than 10 years. And so like, you know, if I'm up late at night and I will, you know, had a couple drinks, I'll go to the newspaper site and be like, let's see what I can find. And I, you know, over the course of like this over decades worth of stuff, I have like a ridiculously long spreadsheet of like, you know, newspaper articles connecting dots. You ever see like that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia where it's like, you know, like the thing with like it's like a murder scene kind of detective situation? I have one of those on my computer and it's really ridiculous. So essentially what I would do is I'd like find all the stuff and then put it in the spreadsheet and not necessarily know what to do with it. Like Jerome O'Brien, like who's Jerome O'Brien? Is he Jerry O'Brien? I had no idea. So then once the idea for this came up, I said, okay, well now I gotta really smarten up and like, you know, tighten all this business up. So I went back and I said, okay, well I gotta figure, I think this guy Jerry is Jerome, and that's when I knuckled down on the particular data points in my spreadsheet to like really kind of figure out what the deal was. The other thing was that, so when Mick Maloney died, me and one other person were the people who cleaned out his place, and I got copies of all the interviews. So I have been able to benefit by going through and like, you know, for example, the DeWitt interview, I hadn't listened to it yet, and so this gave me a great opportunity to kind of like go in and be like, oh, well, let's see if he talks about, you know, O'Leary at all, which he kind of didn't, because as Mick told me, Mick never interviewed Joe O'Leary, even though he was still alive at the time when he was in Boston. But the problem was that DeWitt wasn't going to tell Mick that O'Leary was still alive because they had had a falling out. So, you know, but I did get all the story about the cruise stuff out of that, and that because I just happened to find the cruise brochure on eBay once. I like, oh well, you know, got me interested in cruises. You know, Irish cruises from the 20s, which is something that no sane person should really ever concern himself with. You know, and like the other dude I really love is this guy Sean O'Nolan. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he was like he wrote the song, the Colcannon song. Did you ever read Colcannon? He wrote that. He wrote a bunch. He wrote the Boys from the County Cork. He had, you know, he wrote and he was a mentor for the McNulty family. but he was also like did cruises like in 1928, 1929, and you know, so I kind of like, you know, had a portion of the spreadsheet about like Irish cruising, what's the deal there? So I could like connect the dots with all that stuff, and then with let's see, I don't remember, like, you know, so I had a lot of like raw data sort of like lying around, and because I had, you know, access to new interviews and like easy access, I didn't have to go to NYU to like do this collection and like, you know, deal with the bureaucracy there. You know, I could start like, you know, really kind of riffing with the data and figuring out how to arrange it in a way that actually matched the known knowns. You know, like if it's something's published in the newspaper that gives you good like date to settle on, like, oh, that was released on such and such a date, or this meeting happened in, you know, September 29th, 1926. So then you know, you can work your way around that and arrange the material in a way that makes sense, and it comes together. And so that, you know, some of that was done the last few months. So, you know, it's really a product of like long-term data collection and more recent fashioning. Yes.
So Jerry was a dancer
Yes.
in Ireland. Can you tell us a little bit more about his connections when he got here with dancing, playing for dancers versus playing for recordings or audiences? And did he ever go back to dancing at all?
I don't know. The reason for this is that dancing is reported on very poorly in the newspapers that I have online access to. There are Irish newspapers. There are like 3 other Irish newspapers that were like important publications from the teens up to the 40s, I guess. And to access those, you have to go to the New York Public Library or to their microfilm section, and that's. And I, you know, not being a graduate student anymore, I don't have oodles of time with which to do that. I have children. I mean, come on now.
So Jerry, he competed in a fish in
That
New York,
1936,
right?
yeah.
1936, and the cup that he won is at the back.
I need to take a picture of that for Jean
yeah,
Butler. She
so I'll
told me she
grab it.
wants me to send it.
So Jerry's granddaughter, Erin McCormick, so Marie McCormick, who was quoted in many of the
Yep.
recordings that they made. Erin McCormick is here.
Oh.
Right here at the back. This is Jerry's granddaughter. And so it's passed down through generations from her grandfather because she's also a dancer. She was in river dance.
Patents.
And yeah. Oh, yeah. And her teacher is right here, Colleen Griffiths. So,
Well, all right.
yeah.
Now, so yeah, he won that cup in 1936. And again, I need to take a picture of that for Jean Butler, who would like to know about that.
1932.
That was 32?
April 12th.
Oh, well, not too shabby.
Won by Jerry O'Brien.
But O'Leary's band was a frequent performer at like any Irish event in New York. I mean, and there were more than one O'Leary's bands. Like, you know, you might have 2 or 3 O'Leary's bands playing at different things over the course of one night because they were just that popular. So Jerry would have been a member of the band going out to play for like dinner dances or, you know, GAA events or county dances and things like that. So there are, I mean, you know, you do see coverage where Jerry is in the position as a musician where people are dancing. It's just that they don't sort of make any real explicit connection. It's just sort of implied, oh yeah, he's playing for dancing. So he did play, and occasionally you'd see him as a demonstration dancer at some of these events. But that's all. They really don't tell you very much.
He danced at my in-laws' wedding reception.
Somebody's phone like that.
That's a great granddaughter.
Does that answer your question?
Pretty much,
Okay.
as far as you know, I guess.
Yeah. Yes.
And in addition to being a dancer, Jerry O'Brien also played pipes. That is war pipes, right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
believe you did.
Yeah.
Nobody in the family seems to remember that, but
No one knows
Yeah,
about that. That's news to me.
Yeah.
News to me.
I'm just curious that this would be kind of, you know, like repertoires, repertoire just of, you know, your basic marches or other?
No
tunes?
idea what the
No
repertoire
idea.
would have been. No
Interesting.
idea. Like they when they list like the pipers who are going to be there, he's listed, and that's it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
But he hung on to his pipes long.
No, those aren't
No.
his pipes.
Oh, sorry.
Those are Michael J. Toomey's
That's right.
pipes.
That's right. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway.
Toomey.
Toomey.
TWO.
Oh, I was thinking that.
MUI. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea when Laverne DeWitt started to sell their own branded accordions? Was Jerry part of?
I don't. I'm gonna guess that it was post World War II. So, but I don't know.
I think Jerry designed the accordions for Laverne DeWitt, and a number of the students that he taught in the Boston area. I don't know if anybody is here. I know there are a few students of his still around, and he designed the accordions. They bought them from him, so they stocked the accordion, and he had a direct connection with the accordion company, from what I understand.
Yeah, and he was also an endorser of, I think, Globe accordions. And
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are DeWitt, Globe accordions with DeWitt's name on them, which would
Yeah, they
Which
had
would come-
all the accordions had the Auburn DeWitt.
Yeah.
And there's
But I
many
ima-
of those floating around.
Yeah, I imagine he didn't design the Globe ones. I think the Globe ones were probably like Globe accordions that were branded, but the Paolo ones, I think he probably.
The Palo,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm.
Anybody else? Bueller.
Did you talk about, I don't remember if you talked about how he arrived here.
Yeah.
Oh, you did, okay. Okay, like he was escaping.
Yeah.
Okay, I missed that.
Yes.
You said right at the end, and everyone knows what happened.
Yeah.
Oh,
I thought of that too.
I don't know. I mean, so when I got to the end, I kind of petered out. I don't know.
I don't know what happened.
Oh well. Yeah. I think that probably a lot of people know here that Jerry was Joe Duran's teacher. So I kind of like led into that. Everybody knows that Jerry was Joe Duran's teacher.
Thank you.
So, did you not know? Oh, you didn't. My goodness.
So Jerry O'Brien yet walks the streets of Boston. Like, what happened to him other than teaching Joe Duran?
Thank you.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's only so much you can do in 40 minutes.
He had passed before I was born, and passed when, this is my sister Kathleen that's here with us, she was
Hi,
5
Kathleen.
when he passed, so we don't know a lot of him other than the lore, some of what you're saying today. I mean, I can speak on his death. He went for a walk by a lake and had a heart attack
Oh.
and passed away.
What year
I
he
believe
died?
he was in his early 70s
So
when he passed. Yeah, I want to
he
say.
and his wife raised 6 children.
Yeah, my mother was the oldest of the 6, Marie. And our Uncle Joe, so Joe Durain was our Uncle Joe's godfather.
Okay.
And Joe and his wife were in my parents' wedding party. When you mentioned Hibernian Hall, that's where our parents met at a St. Patrick's Day dance when my granddad was playing. So it's really a part of an intrinsic part of our family, our granddad's music, even though I never met him and don't know much of him. Still, it's in our lineage and is part of our culture.
Sure, we
our
shaped
family.
yeah.
Shaped us.
It's very cool.
Thank
Very
you.
cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Sure.
There's a few other relatives here. His grandnephews are right here, Sean and Tim Cohane.
Oh.
They do not play accordion well.
Not with that attitude.
Dancers.
Well,
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's
So,
good. That's
yeah,
good too. Yeah.
dancers.
Anybody else?
Anyone else?
Going once. Twice. 3 times.
Great.
All right.
Well,
That's it.
well, thanks, Dan. I'm really glad.
Thank you very much, everybody.
We'll take just a few minutes to reset. There's snacks, things out there if you need a break, and we'll just reset the room and you'll hear accordion music that will make you think of Jerry O'Brien. So, great. Hold on tight. We'll be right back.